The Grand Synod of the Ethelgard hegemony did not debate war. They debated the precise calibration of mercy, or at least, the bureaucratic definition of it that allowed for the subjugation of lesser species under the guise of protection. The chamber itself was a testament to this arrogance, a sprawling architectural marvel carved from the interior of a hollowed-out moon, where the walls shimmered with the living bioluminescence of the Kael'tha's moss, breathing ancient oxygen into the lungs of the galaxy's self-proclaimed architects. Light did not merely illuminate this space. It was curated, filtered through vast crystalline panes that fractured the starlight of the home system into spectrums representing the 7 castes of the hegemony. In the center of the amphitheater, suspended by gravity-dampening fields that hummed with a sound closer to a seismic vibration than a mechanical drone, floated the High Archon's podium. It was here, amidst the heavy silence of 1,000 gathered representatives from 100 subjugated worlds, that the fate of the Sol system was being decided with the casual indifference of a gardener pruning a wild hedge. The air smelled of ozone and the dusty, metallic scent of ancient parchment, for the hegemony still recorded its greatest decrees on physical matter, believing that digital archives were too ephemeral for the weight of their history. High Counselor Valen shifted his weight on the obsidian bench, his 4 eyes narrowing as they focused on the holographic projection hovering above the Archon. It was a crude, unstable rendering of the target, a small yellow star located in the desolate, unmapped spiral arm that the hegemony charts referred to only as the Silent Expanse. There were no trade routes there, no hyperlanes, no beacons of civilization. Just the cold, indifferent dark and this single, noisy system that had recently begun to bleed primitive radio waves into the ether. Valen felt a tremor of unease ripple through his primary nervous system, a biological warning he had learned to ignore in favor of political expediency. The debate had been raging for 3 cycles, though debate was a generous term for what was essentially a ritualized agreement to expand the borders. The Archon spoke of peace envoys, a euphemism that tasted like ash in Valen's mouth. He knew what peace envoys were. They were colossal dreadnoughts painted in white and gold, armed with tectonic destabilizers and atmosphere-stripping beams, designed to arrive, demonstrate godlike power, and accept the unconditional surrender of the primitives before a single shot was fired in anger. It was a conquest of awe, not attrition. "The primitives of Sol 3, the Archon intoned, his voice amplified so that it resonated in the chest cavities of every being present, are a chaotic variable. Our long-range telemetry indicates rapid industrialization, atomic experimentation, and a fracture in their planetary unity. They are children playing with fire in a room full of dried tinder. If we do not intervene, they will burn themselves and potentially destabilize the local subspace manifold. It is our burden, our heavy burden, to bring them into the fold. To dispatch the peace envoys is an act of charity." A murmur of assent rippled through the chamber, the rustle of stiff ceremonial robes sounding like dry leaves in a storm. Valen remained silent, his gaze fixed on the hologram. The data felt wrong. The energy signatures emanating from that sector were inconsistent with early-stage atomic civilizations. There were spikes of background radiation that defied the standard decay models, and the gravitational lensing around the star was too perfect. It lacked the chaotic wobble of a natural system. But to speak now would be to question the wisdom of the Archon, and in the hegemony, heresy was treated with far less mercy than a primitive civilization. The decision was ratified with the striking of the sun gong, a resonant boom that signaled the mobilization of the 7th Pacification Armada. Valen was assigned as the lead diplomatic observer, a role that was theoretically prestigious but practically a punishment for his previous reluctance regarding the subjugation of the Valeri Cloud Whales. He would be the face of the hegemony's mercy, the one to stand on the bridge of the flagship light of salvation and deliver the ultimatum to the humans. As he exited the Grand Synod, the weight of the task pressed on him. He walked through the corridors of the Moon City, observing the statues of conquered heroes who had bent the knee, their likenesses preserved in eternal gratitude. He wondered, with a cynicism he dared not voice, if the humans would look as grateful when the shadow of the light of salvation blotted out their sun. The intelligence reports described them as fractured, aggressive, and emotional, a species prone to short-sighted violence. They were the perfect candidates for guidance. The journey to the Sol sector was accomplished through the tier-space corridors, a method of travel that folded the fabric of reality like wet parchment, allowing the fleet to bypass the light years in a matter of weeks. On board the flagship, the atmosphere was one of board superiority. The crew, A mix of Ethelgard officers and subservient client species went about their duties with the laxity of those who expected no resistance. Valen spent his time in the stellar cartography dome, watching the abyss rush by. He was troubled by the silence. Usually, as a fleet approached an inhabited system, even a primitive one, there was a crescendo of noise, leaking transmissions, navigational radar, the chatter of satellites. But as they neared the heliopause of the Sol system, the sensors reported nothing but a flat, oppressive baseline of static. It was not the silence of an empty room. It was the silence of a held breath. Perhaps they have already destroyed themselves. The fleet commander, a towering Ethelgard named Korth, suggested one rotation as they stood observing the main view screen. Korth was a warrior of the old school, his carapace scarred from the pacification of the Drazel rebellions. He viewed diplomacy as a delay to the inevitable kinetic solution. It would save us the ammunition. We plant the flag, terraform the ruins, and move on. Or perhaps they are listening, Valen replied softly, his mandibles clicking in agitation. The silence is too absolute, Commander. Even a dead world whispers, this feels like dampening. Korth laughed, a harsh, grating sound. Dampening? They are splitting atoms to boil water, Valen. They do not have the technology to dampen a planetary signature, let alone a solar one. You see shadows where there are only insects. The transition back to normal space was scheduled to occur just outside the orbit of the furthest planetary body, a gas giant the locals called Neptune. The fleet dropped out of tier space in a formation designed to maximize intimidation. A geometric wall of white gold hulls, weapon ports glowing with blue ion energy, shields shimmering in the vacuum. Korth ordered the main comms array to broadcast the standard greeting of submission on all frequencies, a message that had brought 1,000 worlds to their knees. People of Earth, the message boomed, translated by AI algorithms into every major language of the target world. We are the Ethelgard hegemony. We bring you order. We bring you purpose. Lay down your weapons, deactivate your defenses, and prepare to receive your envoys. Resistance is mathematical impossibility. They waited for the panic. They waited for the desperate pleas, the chaotic military scrambling, the launch of primitive chemical rockets that would be swatted aside like gnats. Instead, the sensors screamed. It was not a weapon discharge. It was not a hostile scan. It was the sudden, impossible realization that the fleet was not in a vacuum. The space around them, the empty void between the planets, was thick. The readings went haywire, showing density where there should be nothing but hard radiation and dust. The light of salvation shuddered, its massive engines whining as they fought against a drag that defied the laws of physics. Report, Korth bellowed, his composure cracking for the first time. Navigational hazard. Did we exit inside a nebula? No, Commander. The sensor officer's voice trembled, a sound Valen had never heard from a hegemony-disciplined caste. It's the vacuum, it's stiffening. The local space-time manifold is increasing in viscosity. We are being held. Valen stared at the view screen. The stars were not twinkling. They were steady, unmoving points of light, as if the very medium through which light traveled had been solidified. Then the darkness shifted. From the shadow of the gas giant Neptune, and from the asteroid belts, and from the empty dark above the orbital plane, shapes began to resolve. They were not ships. They were not stations. They were monoliths of matte black geometry, absorbing the light of the distant sun so completely that they looked like holes punched in the universe. They were immense, some dwarfing the light of salvation by an order of magnitude. There were no visible engines, no weapon ports, no windows, just silent, geometric perfection. Target them, Korth roared, panic turning to aggression. Fire the main batteries, maximum yield. We cannot lock on, the weapons officer screamed back. The targeting systems are failing, the energy, it's not leaving the emitters. The beam cohesion is dissolving the moment it touches the vacuum. Hold fire, Valen commanded, his voice cutting through the chaos with a sudden, icy clarity. He realized in that terrifying moment that they were not the predators here. They were not even the prey. They were the curiosity. Do not provoke them further. Look at the energy readings. On the tactical display, the power output of the hegemony fleet was a series of bright red spikes. Surrounding them, the ambient energy of the Sol system was a calm, oceanic blue ocean. But the scale was logarithmic. The energy contained within the silent black monoliths was not merely superior, it was astronomical. They weren't running on fusion or antimatter. They were drawing from the zero-point energy of the vacuum itself, A technology the hegemony had theorized was impossible, a fevered dream of mad scientists. A voice cut through the bridge, bypassing the communication systems entirely and resonating directly from the ship's hull, vibrating the air in the room. It was not loud, but it carried the weight of a collapsing star. It spoke in perfect High Ethelgard, a dialect so formal and archaic that only the scholars and the High Archon used it. "You have entered the sanctuary of Saul," the voice said. It was neither male nor female. It was the sound of geology of tectonic plates shifting. "Your weapons are charged. Your intent is conquest. Explain this violation of the silence." Korth stood frozen, his hand hovering over the manual override for the weapons. He looked at Valen, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and confusion. The primitive humans were supposed to be hiding in caves, fearful of the dark. They were not supposed to be projecting voices into the sealed bridge of a capital ship. Valen stepped forward, moving toward the pickup, though he suspected the listeners didn't need a microphone. "I am High Counselor Valen of the Ethelgard hegemony," he said, forcing his voice to remain steady. We came believing this system was in chaos. We came to offer guidance." "Guidance," the voice repeated. The word hung in the air, heavy with irony. "You come with tectonic destabilizers to guide. You come with chains to liberate. Your logic is flawed, Counselor Valen. Your definition of peace is merely silence enforced by the gun." Suddenly, the view screen shifted. The image of the fleet and the black monoliths vanished, replaced by a view of Earth. But it was not the Earth from the intelligence reports. The blue marble was encased in a delicate, shimmering lattice of light, a planetary ring of silver and gold that pulsed with a rhythmic heartbeat. Ships, elegant and organic in design, moved between the surface and the ring in a ceaseless flow of commerce and exploration. And beyond Earth, Mars was green. A verdant, breathing world of oceans and forests. The scope of the terraforming was impossible. It would have taken the hegemony 10,000 cycles to achieve such a result. The humans had done it in the time since the probe's last update. "We are not the broken children you expected," the voice continued. "We passed our great filter. We looked into the abyss of our own nature, and we did not blink. We chose stewardship over conquest. We chose mastery of self over mastery of others, and in doing so, we unlocked the doors you are still trying to batter down." "If you possess such power," Korth snarled, regaining a shred of his pride, "why hide? Why let the galaxy think you are weak? Why not take your place on the council?" "Because," the voice replied, and for the first time there was a tone of sadness in the titanic sound, "we are busy. And because the galaxy is not ready for the burden we carry. You seek to expand your empire because you fear the dark. You conquer because you are afraid of being alone. We do not fear the dark. We are the watchers on the wall." The ship shook violently, not from an impact, but from a sudden displacement. The stars outside blurred into streaks of impossible color. "What is happening?" Korth shouted. "We are moving," the navigator whispered, staring at his console in disbelief. "The entire fleet. We are being moved, not by engines. Space itself is being folded around us. They are relocating us." In seconds, the blur subsided. The heavy viscosity of the vacuum vanished. The sensors cleared. Valen looked at the star charts. They were back at the edge of the Ethelgard space, thousands of light years from Saul, deposited instantly, dismissively, like a guest who had overstayed their welcome and was gently placed outside the door. But they were not alone. Floating in front of the flagship was a single object, a small, white geometric shape, no larger than a shuttle. It hailed them. "This is Ambassador Kale of the Terran Stewardship." A new voice came through, this one human, sounding terrifyingly ordinary, like a man speaking across a table. "We have returned you to your borders to prevent a diplomatic incident. We understand that your aggression was born of ignorance, and therefore we do not hold a grudge. However, we invite High Counselor Valen to transport over. We wish to open a dialogue. The rest of you, go home. Tell your Archon that Saul is not for sale." Korth looked ready to order a suicidal charge back into the warp, but the display of power, the instant teleportation of an entire armada, had broken the spirit of the crew. They looked to Valen. "I will go," Valen said, straightening his robes. He felt a strange sense of calm. The fear was gone, replaced by an overwhelming curiosity. The hegemony was stagnant, rotting from the inside with its own arrogance. But what he had seen in the Saul system, that was life, that was the future. The transfer to the human vessel was seamless. One moment he was on the bridge, the next he was standing in a room of white light and polished wood. There were no visible seams, no harsh machinery. A human male stood by a wide window that looked out not at space but at a projection of a garden. He wore simple clothing, a tunic of gray fabric, no armor, no badges of rank. He looked fragile, soft. "Counselor," the human said, bowing slightly. "I am Kale. Thank you for agreeing to speak. We apologize for the theatricality of our defense, but your fleet commander seemed the type who responds only to overwhelming stimuli." You folded space," Valen stammered, his mind still reeling. "You terraformed Mars, you have mastery over zero-point energy, yet you hide in the silent expanse. Why? With this power you could rule the galaxy, you could end the wars of the hegemony in a day." Kale smiled, a sad, weary smile. He gestured for Valen to sit. "Tea. It's a mild stimulant. We find it helps with the existential dread." He poured a steaming liquid into a ceramic cup. "You ask why we don't rule. It is because the desire to rule is a symptom of infancy. When we discovered the physics that allowed us to reshape reality, we also discovered the cost. Energy is not free, counselor. Every action creates a ripple. To use power for conquest is to disturb the equilibrium of the universe in ways that are catastrophic." "But you threatened us," Valen countered. "We halted you," Kale corrected. "We stopped you from firing weapons that would have damaged the fabric of the local spacetime. We did not kill a single one of your crew. We simply placed you where you could do no harm." Valen took the cup. The heat warmed his clawed hands. "You called yourselves Watchers on the Wall." "What wall? The galaxy is mapped. We know the borders." Kale's expression hardened. He tapped the table and the garden view vanished. In its place was a projection of the galaxy, spiraling and beautiful. But then the view zoomed out beyond the galactic rim into the intergalactic void. There in the deep dark, something was moving. It looked like a shadow against the blackness, a bruising of the nothingness. It was vast, larger than star clusters, a darkness that was eating the light. "The hegemony plays at empire building in the nursery," Kale said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You fight over resources, over ideology, over pride. You do not look out the window. This is the entropic tide. It is a decay of physical laws, a wavefront of negation that is sweeping in from the void. It consumes gravity, light matter. It unmakes existence." Valen stared at the horror on the screen. And you." "We detected it 300 years ago," Kale said. "That is when we stopped fighting each other. That is when we stopped looking for colonies. We turned our entire civilization, every ounce of our industrial and scientific might, into a shield. The Sol system is not a fortress, counselor. It is an anchor. The monoliths you saw, they are stitching the fabric of reality together. We are holding the line. We are generating enough coherent reality to push the tide back, to keep the galaxy stable for a few more millennia." Valen felt the breath leave him. The hegemony believed they were the masters of the galaxy, the apex of civilization. And all the while, right on their doorstep, the humans, the primitives, were standing in the storm, holding up the roof of the world so that the Ethelgard could continue their petty games of conquest underneath it. "Why didn't you tell us?" Valen asked, his voice shaking. "Would you have believed us?" Kale asked gently. "Or would you have seen our technology and tried to take it? Would you have tried to weaponize the shield generators? We ran the simulations, Valen. In 99% of scenarios, the hegemony tries to seize Sol, disrupts the array, and the tide consumes this arm of the galaxy within a century. We couldn't take the risk, so we became the ghost story, the silence in the dark." Valen looked at the human, this small, soft creature who carried the weight of the universe on his shoulders. He felt a profound sense of shame, and then a spark of hope. The hegemony is arrogant," Valen admitted, "but we are not suicidal. If the Archon saw this, if the Council knew." "That is why you are here," Kale said. "We cannot hold the line forever alone. The tide is strengthening. We need resources. We need logistics. We need the Ethelgard fleet, not as conquerors, but as supply lines. We need your engineers. We need your unity." Kale extended a hand, a gesture of partnership that spans species and light years. "Go back to your High Synod, counselor. Tell them you conquered the humans. Tell them we have submitted to become a protectorate of the hegemony. Tell them whatever you must to bring your fleets back to Sol, not with guns, but with supplies. We will play the role of the vassal if it saves the galaxy. We do not care about the title. We care about the work." Valen stood. He looked at the hand, then up at the human's eyes. He saw the iron will behind the kindness. The unimaginable power was not in their machines, but in their humility, in their willingness to let the galaxy think they were weak, just to keep the galaxy safe. "No," Valen said, and he clasped the human's hand with both of his. "I will not tell them we conquered you. The lie would rot us further. I will go back and I will tear the roof off the synod. I will show them the dark. I will make them see. That is a dangerous path, Kale warned. They may execute you for heresy. Then I will die with my eyes open, Valen said, feeling a strength he hadn't known he possessed, which is more than the hegemony has done for 1,000 years. As Valen transported back to his ship, the light of salvation hung in the void, a tiny speck of gold against the infinite black. But behind him, the Sol system burned with a hidden light, a beacon of defiance against the end of everything. The peace envoys had come to subjugate a primitive world, but they were leaving with a mission that would redefine their existence. The humans had answered the call of war with the silence of a shield, and in doing so, they had not just defeated the fleet. They had drafted the galaxy into a war for survival itself. Valen entered the bridge, the silence of the crew heavy and expectant. Korth looked at him, sneering slightly. "Well," the commander barked, "did they surrender? Did they beg for our mercy?" Valen walked to the comms station, his stride purposeful, his head held high. He keyed the fleet-wide channel, preparing to address the thousands of souls who thought they were masters of the universe. "Set course for the homeworld," Valen ordered, his voice ringing with the authority of a man who has seen the face of God and found it wearing the mask of a servant. "And prepare the archives. We have much to unlearn." The stars seemed to shine a little brighter as the engines engaged, no longer just points of light, but fires that needed tending. And humanity, the gardeners of the abyss, were waiting for help. The galaxy had sent envoys of peace, and humanity had answered with the truth: peace was not a decree. It was a job, and the shift was just beginning. Back in the Sol system, Kale watched the alien fleet accelerate away. He took a sip of his tea, the steam rising against the backdrop of the swirling, predatory shadow at the edge of the universe. The sensors pinged, a minor breach in the causality barrier near Pluto, a tentacle of the tide reaching in. "Dispatch the third repair wing," Kale said to the empty air, "and route power from the Jupiter ring, patch it up." "Acknowledged," the ship's AI replied. "Shall I raise the threat level?" "No," Kale said, turning back to the datapad where the logistics of a galactic alliance were already being drafted. "Keep it steady. We have friends coming. We just have to hold the door open a little longer." The silence of Sol returned, but it was no longer the silence of emptiness. It was the hum of a machine running at full power, the sound of a species that had looked at the inevitable end of all things and said simply, "Not today." The unimaginable power of humanity was not that they could destroy worlds, but that they had decided against all odds to save them. And that was a weapon the Ethelgard had never anticipated, and one the dark could not withstand. The era of the hegemony was over. The era of the stewardship had begun. And for the first time in eons, the galaxy was not just being ruled, it was being protected. In the Grand Synod, weeks later, the doors would open, and Valen would stand before the Archon, not with a treaty of surrender, but with a map of the encroaching dark. The shouting would be loud, the denial fierce. But Valen carried a recording in his pocket, a simple data crystal given to him by Kale. It contained not threats, not demands, but a blueprint. A blueprint for a shield generator that required the combined output of the Ethelgard's 7 castes. It was a puzzle that could only be solved by unity. The humans had weaponized cooperation. And as Valen looked at the squabbling, fearful politicians of his empire, he knew the hardest battle wasn't against the tide or the humans. It was against their own nature. But he also knew, remembering the green of Mars and the calm eyes of Kale, that it was a battle they could win. Because now they weren't fighting for territory. They were fighting for the light, and the humans had already lit the torch.